Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Kyle. I'm really excited to be here today and chat with you guys. So Kyle kind of chatted a lot about the overall vision of Gatsby as a project, as a kind of company, the product roadmap, what jobs that like Gatsby is solving. I think this is going to be a little bit. This is going to maybe be a little bit more narrow, but trying to focus this on kind of a key question, which is how have websites changed over the last, say, 20 years? Between that 1994, Vignet, early 2000s, WordPress, and today. What's changed? What's different about the website world, and about the way we need to build to provide great user experiences? What tools do we need to use? How does all of that change over time? How has that changed, and how will it change? So I should probably move into present mode, huh? Let's do this. Let's just kind of start really, talking about like who are the key stakeholders in any website, and kind of drawing broad brushstrokes here. But we've got and what do they want? We've got content creators who are working inside CMSs, who want an editing experience where they can just rapidly iterate, where they can they might have 10 or 15 or 20 edits that they need to make, and just be able to like rapidly go through and update copy and like think through, well, what if we presented it this way, or what if we presented it that way? What if I showed this to my boss? What would she say? Or what would the relevant stakeholder think if we did this way instead? And like be able to kind of iterate rapidly that way. Developers again, the key goal is that rapid iteration. How can like developers, as a developer, you want to work and build kind of the fundamental like UI and other functionality of a website in a way that lets you iterate and move quickly, right? You don't want to kind of be stuck waiting for, we have a code freeze for like 3 weeks. We can't do anything, or we don't have access to the CMS. So we've got to sit on our hands until we get access to the CMS. These things can be tremendously frustrating while working on website projects. And then you want to have like a great modern development experience where you can just change quickly and see your results rapidly, and be able to kind of get to a great experience as quickly as possible. And then finally, for like a site visitor, like primarily there's a lot of things they care about. They care about like user experience. They care about those things are like largely, I think, captured in our existing website building workflows. One kind of thing that really stands out that is often under-addressed is website performance. So 50% of visitors will bounce if a site takes 3 seconds or longer to load, and many sites on mobile do. And if you bounce, you are clearly unhappy with the state of your experience. That's the most fundamental indicator of whether you are happy or not, is do you stay on the page? And what this all comes down to is that developing for the web is hard. Right? Why is developing for the web hard? Well, it's hard because with millions of websites, developers have to create compelling experiences to engage audiences. Ultimately, in a world where these new destinations are only a few keystrokes away, things are just getting more and more competitive on the web. You look at the percentage of retail spend that's going to e-commerce, right? You look at everyone's, you look at these old kind of brands like the Procter & Gamble's of the world, the Unilevers of the world that own all these consumer brands, and now they're afraid of the Dollar Shave Clubs and the Harrys, who are coming in kind of with these digitally native brands and kind of taking their market share. They're worried about the future of their business, and they need to create compelling experiences to make folks like engage with them. Otherwise, they're worried that that their company is kind of toast in the long run. And this is a real challenge for like a lot of folks. This is true. I just kind of picked one example, but we can look at any industry. We can look at content. We can look at retail. We can look at travel. We can look at clothing. Like whatever kinds of sites you build on the internet for whatever kinds of customers you have, like these trends are affecting them. Or if you're in-house at a company and you're building for them, again, these trends are affecting them. So what that means is that the returns to having an incredible web presence, not just an okay, so-so, this looks mostly like everybody else, but an incredible web presence is rising. A website that's 10% better than the competition, however you want to measure that, might deliver 20% or 50% or 100% more revenue, right? The internet has matured, in other words. It's not just a place to, the internet started as a place to publish content, right? Document-based model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like the internet has become a place of experiences, of destinations. It's matured, right? And so if we look at kind of some of the tooling that we use to publish, but how do we get to creating experiences? Well, we still have to publish content to the web, right? But it's more than publishing content. Like the CMS started in a world where publishing content was difficult, where early CMSs like Vignet, closed source, difficult to use, hundreds of thousands of dollars for licenses. WordPress, Drupal came along in the early 2000s. They were born to make content sites possible, right? When publishing on the web was difficult, I don't know, maybe this is dating me a little bit, but when I was a kid, I had like my own AngelFire website, right? And I was, making making pages, and I was so excited, right? Like, okay, that's like, a fun website for a teenager, right? But like, it's not really a scalable content solution. WordPress, Drupal, et cetera, these were born as kind of scalable content solutions. The challenge, though, is that like the web has matured, right? It's easy to publish content. There's a million different services we can use to publish content. The web is being reimagined to make content publishing. Content publishing is already quite possible, and the web is being reimagined to make the experience for all of the stakeholders incredible. So kind of getting a little bit into the mechanics of how that works. Think about the CMS kind of as a bundle of services, and there's a graphic in the next slide that will kind of illustrate this more. But as the CMS matured, what these features were kind of emerged, right? Like, oh hey, like we need search, we need analytics, we need payments, we need enterprise CMS personalization. We need e-commerce capability, checkout and cart. We need all of these things for our website, right? And like categories started forming around them, and you started having providers that were kind of solely devoted to solving one problem and solving it very well. And if we think about this, in terms of architectures, we had this, kind of back to Kyle's point about, the monolithic CMS, right? A traditional full stack CMS is a monolithic stack. It encapsulates everything, whether that's, WordPress or Drupal doing that in a, PHP runtime, or more enterprise CMSs with with a different stack, but it encompasses all of these things. It encompasses forms, auth, analytics, search, presentation, page creation, preview, UI components, and the development experience, right? It encompasses all of these things. It's a content store as well, so it's got a content editing UI and it's got a database backend. And then quite often, depending on the CMS, it will also encapsulate hosting as well. But over time, the lesson we learn over and over again is that monolithic applications, as they mature, break into modularized pieces that are then, defined by they're split up by well-defined interfaces and all brought together. And each of these modular pieces evolves into kind of a best-of-breed tool that gets pulled into the overall product. So what a CMS is changing, because this is the old on the left we have the old CMS. On the right hand, we have something that we don't quite know what to call it yet. We call this the content mesh, right? Other people call it a distributed CMS. They call it agile CMS. They call it content microservices. Whatever you want to call it, what it means is that your content and functionality live in a lot of different places because you want to get the best of breed, experiences for each one when you're building when you're building websites. But you need something that makes it easy to pull it all in together. So that's what we call the content mesh. And what that means is that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was fine. It was good enough to pick a CMS that you liked. Depending on the kind of project, maybe it's an enterprise CMS like a Sitecore, maybe it's a WordPress or a Drupal. But whatever the project needs, you find a CMS that has like kind of the functionality you need, and then you go with it. But today, that's not good enough anymore, right? And it's not good enough anymore because these separate components and functionality on the right have gotten so much better. React as a UI library and as a development experience. If we talk about kind of the what it's like to have payment on the web, it's like Stripe. If we talk about kind of these solutions for auth, Auth0, Okta, like Algolia for search, these best-of-breed Google Analytics segment for analytics, like all of these best-of-breed solutions exist and clients who want kind of the best business results out of the website want to be able to work in these best-of-breed tools, not in a CMS specific like tooling that's kind of 3 years out of date, or 4 years out of date, or 5 years out of date, or 10 years out of date. So you just kind of a couple of stories of folks that we've talked to who are in the middle of these transition processes, who are busy working internally or working with clients to move from a kind of stack on the left to a stack on the right. A team running an e-commerce site is migrating from Drupal. They're splitting up their CMS. They're storing their products in Contentful. They're storing reviews in Bazaarvoice, which is like a user review service, and they're storing their user data in Auth0. Ultimately, kind of coming. If we talk about the areas of innovation. In each of these pieces on the right, again, to kind of like just bucket it back into who are the personas here, who are the stakeholders. Like ultimately, it comes back to providing kind of headless, providing the workflow experiences that content creators need to use, whether that's a service like Contentful, or a headless WordPress or a headless Drupal, or could even be something like Google Sheets, right? Like maybe you have a team that's working internally and they want to collaborate on a spreadsheet, an Airtable or Google Sheets, and they want to use that. Maybe they have maybe your recruiting team is using a applicant tracking system like Lever or Greenhouse, and so the job data lives there, and so you need to integrate that into the company site, right? There's so many different kinds of content workflows and so many different pieces of functionality, and that have emerged over the last few years. Modern tooling, so React, and then when we talk about the Jamstack, and when we talk about progressive web apps, all these new modern thinking on how we make a site super fast to address the rise in mobile and e-commerce, which a stat that a lot of people don't know, just to kind of preview some of the later bits of the talk. In 2014, 20% of traffic was on mobile devices, even though smartphones had been around for a while, right? In the US, 20% of traffic was on a mobile device. In 2017, that went up to 50%, right? So suddenly it goes from like a fraction, a sizable fraction, but still a fraction, to half of the traffic on your website is coming from people on their smartphones, right? How's their mobile network? How is their, is that an iPhone? Maybe. Is that like a medium to low end Android device with limited processing power that's going to hang for 3 seconds if your JavaScript bundle is too big? Maybe it is. We don't know. So yeah, this is kind of like walking through the story of like these areas of rapid innovation. We've got these, we've got these vendors in headless CMS world. We've got modern front-end frameworks, React and Angular, obviously the most well-known. Vue is quite popular and rapidly rising as well. Website. Yeah. So fundamentally, like let's kind of so now we've kind of talked about like some of the almost the problem statement, right? Why we're like what's happening here? What do people want to achieve? What are these new technologies, and you know, not what are kind of at least on the high level like the benefits of adopting these new technologies? And now, like kind of for the rest of the talk, we're going to be talking a little bit about how do we get there, and how do we, you know, how do we bring these technologies to not just kind of a small group of, or like somewhat small group of like early adopters, but like make these as easy to use as possible for early adopters and for the entire web. A modern website experience requires modern tooling. So you know, this is, and again, like in going back, this is actually before we go on, and just as a kind of brief interlude, you know, some of the things that we may talk about here, we may know about, but maybe other people in our organizations, maybe that's a client, or maybe that's a coworker, or maybe that's an executive or a product manager or whoever it may be. Maybe they aren't as, you know, maybe they have their nose on different trends than the ones that we have our nose on, right? And so it's important for us to be able to kind of clearly explain and delineate the benefits of these trends that we're seeing to other folks, so that like when we need these kind of broader buy-ins, and this is a theme that Linda's going to be hitting on later as well. So you know, again, some of these you know, some of these points, like even if we're familiar with them, like this is a story that we need to be kind of comfortable telling and sharing with others as we're explaining kind of, and as we're ourselves maybe understanding kind of the technical technical roadmap and the changes inside our organizations as we adopt modern front-end technologies. So a modern website experience requires modern tooling. This is really interesting. Okay, so we've heard so much. If you ever, you know, dive into the comment section of Hacker News, which I'm not sure I recommend, right? Like somebody will pop in there and they will say, "Oh, yet another JavaScript framework. This is another trend of the day. It'll here today, gone tomorrow or next week. You know, it'll fade away. The maintainer will get burned out." And like to be fair, right? We had 10 kind of years of that going on. But the interesting thing is that, and people don't talk about this, is that that's basically stopped. We've now had consolidation, like in terms of usage around React and Angular, and there's different ways of measuring this. I'm doing this as a, you know, I'm looking at Google Trends and seeing how much people are Googling React.js as a, you know, proportion of JavaScript, or Angular.js as a proportion of JavaScript. NPM had a survey, I think they released it a couple days ago, and they said 60% of the people that responded to the survey used React. So, you know, the interest level in kind of React and Angular, the usage level is now, you know, a sizable share, you know, 50%, 60% of the overall kind of usage of JavaScript, and that was never the case, you know, before about 2015, 2014, so on and so forth, right? So this is. I'm sorry? Which one is Angular? Ah, shoot. The orange one is React, and the blue one is Angular. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. If you look at some kind of, if we look at kind of what kind of websites win awards for being well designed and beautiful, here are some of. If you look at the Webby Awards and kind of filter that to like what are the corporate winners of the Webby Awards. The kind of the biggest name corporate winners are all using modern website tooling. BMW.com is on Angular. Architectural Digest is on React. Spotify.me is on Vue. Like what this all comes down to, we touched on this earlier, is that the enterprise CMS is 10 plus years out of date. There's a growing differential in a set of features that has been shipped into the modern front end landscape that is not available in traditional enterprise CMSs. A lot of problems that are much easier to solve in the modern JavaScript ecosystem, whether that's configuring and dealing whether that's kind of like configuring and dealing with local app services and databases, like that goes away once you're dealing with headless cloud CMSs with something like Gatsby, right? Whether that's kind of like a walled development garden ecosystem, and what I mean by that is like you're working on three different CMS websites because you're at an agency, and so you have to re-implement a carousel in each one of them, right? Like these are walled garden UI frameworks. Again, that kind of goes away once you consolidate your UI in React. Or another component-based system. We now have project organization and bundling tools, and we have the virtual DOM, right? Like all of these are the web is the browser can be tough to write, to write code for, and the modern JavaScript ecosystem has solved a lot of the problems and smoothed out a lot of the pain points, but we just need to figure out how to get there and make getting there easy and standard, and not something you have to do a bunch of custom stuff to get there. And that's kind of going back to Kyle's point, that's what we're doing as an organization at Gatsby. Is like we see our goals like smoothing out those roads and paving those roads to make accessing the modern JavaScript ecosystem easy. Yeah, and then so finally, we've kind of talked about we've gone through and we've talked about like the headless, the sort of the CMS landscape, addressing kind of content creators. We've talked about and making them happy. We've talked about modern tooling and the developer and making them happy. Now, kind of let's end kind of by talking about website performance and how to make like our users happy. And I just want to do a brief time check. How am I doing on time?
You're right around 15 more minutes.
50. Okay, great. Okay, cool. So performance is increasingly important. This is, the statistic that I mentioned earlier. Here's the graph that kind of backs it up. Here's the mobile visits as a percentage of total site traffic. You can see it. You can see that number really like half of traffic is coming from smartphones, and that's incredible. Oops, should not be in here. And the business value of that is really easy to demonstrate. There's a lot of surveys that have been done by Google, Amazon, and others. And the consensus of these surveys is that every 100 milliseconds of latency costs 1% of sales or impressions. But it makes 1% of your visitors go away every 100 milliseconds that you add. However, right, performance is difficult to achieve inside traditional website development paradigms, right? And I think there's a number of reasons for this. There's a number of reasons for this, and ultimately, like what it kind of comes down to is that performance is a tragedy of the commons. Folks are kind of familiar with that term from economics. You have a bunch of polluters, right? And if you don't stop polluters from polluting, right, the polluters are going to make it bad for everyone. So in this case, what's a polluter? Well, it's hey, there's this particular piece of code is sending a blocking request for a font file that delayed page load by 800 milliseconds on average. Could be worse. Did we really need that font file? I don't know. I mean, your designer said you needed it, but like, was it worth that 800 millisecond delayed load? nobody can really answer these questions because they don't have the visibility in the first place. And then in addition, the way that we do website development is not well set up to even, optimize. We don't have visibility. We lack visibility. But it's also a complex process. So if there are any like manufacturing nerds in this room, if folks who have read The Goal, which is kind of a classic 1980s book on just-in-time. It laid the foundation for like just-in-time manufacturing. The problem that that often like folks faced on like a factory floor is that like essentially you'd have resource congestion with like a bunch of processes that were going on at the same time, and like someone would not be able to make a part that was essential to like finishing whatever the thing was going to need to do, and then they couldn't get that part because they were waiting on some operation at a different station that was backed up by like 4 different things in front of that, right? So there wasn't a clear way of making throughput through the factory floor in order to get to a finished product as quickly as possible. And so there's a lot of like discussion about like how do you do this, and there's a lot of progress made on that. Like when we're building websites, we have a very similar problem, which is that we're doing a ton of different things. We're sending out network requests to request resources, and then we're evaluating JavaScript, and then we're rendering, and then we're loading images, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But meanwhile, like the end of the day, like the user's kind of waiting on a blank page. So what Gatsby does is it streamlines this process and does a ton of things along the way to just deliver value as fast as possible, right? Like, okay, your image is going to take some time to load. Let's give you, let's compute like an SVG outline of the image, kind of like you see on Medium, and then you then like serve that to you immediately, because that might be 10 kilobytes, or full image might be 500 kilobytes. We can show you that preview right away, and Gatsby makes website performance the default rather than something you have to take a lot of time and energy and effort to achieve. And I think that kind of like our experiences about all this like just speaks to this is kind of a great example, and I've gone pretty deep into this one particular topic to kind of illustrate like a broader point about like what does Gatsby do? Well, Gatsby gives you modern websites, and by the way, like I'm happy to go on at length, and I think Kyle's happy to go on at length even longer than I am on this particular performance stuff. We totally will nerd out about you until the end of the day about that. Please stop us and ask us questions. But like the broader point here is that Gatsby makes modern websites without the DIY. It gives you that functionality, but bakes it into your framework, as opposed to saying, oh, hey, you want performance? Go implement that. Oh, hey, you want to connect to a CMS? Go implement that data loading code. Oh, you want to like hook up React? Okay, set up your like build tooling process. Set up preview if you want that. Right? Gatsby makes modern websites and lets you make modern websites without the DIY. So Gatsby gives you performance out of the box. You can ultimately like bring content. So again, like developers, content creators, site visitors. Gatsby gives you performance out of the box for your users. Lets you bring content from anywhere, so you can use whatever kind of content workflows that your content creators want to use. And then you can use modern development tooling. You can use React for which the developers, myself included, are immensely happier when we get to use these tools. Ultimately, we have it like we've been. And if you need kind of like, if folks ask kind of what is Gatsby, how does Gatsby do all these things, I think at the end of the day, like a lot of the kind of analogy that we've come down to, like what's a simple way of like, how does it do all these things, right? Because ultimately it's a web compiler. It takes your content, it takes your code, it takes your assets, and it makes a highly optimized bundle, and then lets you serve that on the edge, right? So like, if you're in need of a metaphor, just like web compiler is a great one. We now have since V1 launched a year and a half ago, with support for building plugins, people have built over 500 plugins, including over 160 integrations. Right. So if you want, and as mentioned, we have support for any service with a GraphQL API. So for example, we've seen folks building with Magento 2, which has a GraphQL API, Sitecore, which has a GraphQL API, and any other sort of CMS or service that has that on top of the out-of-the-box integrations like Contentful, WordPress, Drupal, Shopify, so on and so forth. And then finally, like, modern development tooling. So again, all the challenges that we see in the old CMS-driven world, developing for the DOM, bundling and project organization, version, even often like you can struggle with version control in a CMS development environment, having a dev server, having hot reloading. And then as well as like add-ons in the modern JavaScript ecosystem that make team collaboration often easier. Storybook for component creation, ESLint and Prettier for linting and formatting, so you don't have to have the code review wars over semicolons or tabs and spaces. Just like dropping in components and component libraries, being able to inspect your components and your data at any point in order to debug. And then finally, like, what I was talking about earlier with performance out of the box, delivery optimization via, CDNs, forget about your app servers, forget about your databases. You don't need to hit any of that at runtime. Those don't need to scale. All you need to do is like run a Gatsby build process, deliver your files to your CDN, and then Gatsby builds in code splitting, smart link prefetching, inlining, critical CSS and JavaScript, progressive and responsive image loading, and a lot of other fun, cool stuff. So kind of just to bring this all back and, kind of go back to the, just to the, go back to kind of the summary here, right? Like the way that we're building websites is changing and has changed as a result of like the revolutions that have changed each of these, different, each of the different worlds of the kind of three key stakeholders of a website. The challenge for us as developers is to build great websites that give these advantages without having to implement everything ourselves, which is often more costly than we would, or our companies would like, and making that all an easy, simple, straightforward experience. And that's all happening with the content mesh, and that's all happening with Gatsby. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks everyone for taking the time, and really excited to spend the rest of the day with everyone.